Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, the D-Day is finally here in the United States as millions of Americans are headed to polls, joining in more than 80 million who've already voted early or by mail to decide who gets to be the 48th president of the United States of America, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Harris is seeking to be the first female president. She's promised to work across party lines. Trump, however, is aiming for sweeping federal changes, including major tariffs and a large-scale deportation operation. In the end, the election will likely come down to 7 key swing states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where the polls are razor close. Both candidates have roughly equal chances to win. In fact, for these very reasons, the US election outcome is the one that's keenly watched globally. The first polls close at 6 p.m., which is early morning tomorrow India time, and we can then expect for initial trends to start trickling in shortly after. So the question is, will star power work for Kamala Harris, or will Trump be able to recreate the magic of his Make America Great Again narrative? Well, that's an answer we would hopefully get by tomorrow. We'll discuss this with our guests tonight. But let's get you what's happening on the ground. And for that, Jessica Stone, the correspondent of Voice of America from Virginia, has filed this report on a whole lot of focus on this election has really been on celebrity endorsement, which essentially shows how crucial this election is. So you have Taylor Swift on one side rooting for Harris, and then Trump's got Elon Musk and the whole Twitter world rooting for him. Now, one needs to watch whether those endorsements will indeed translate into votes. Jessica is here with a special report.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of data on this and some research on this, and it does indicate that about 1 in 10 Americans, according to a YouGov poll, do vote based on the association of a celebrity with a politician, but it can also cut against the politician depending on which celebrity it is, and it can also cut against the celebrity, their association with that politician. So it's not conclusive. That said, we did see a spike in registration, and what we know about youth registration in particular is that 8 million people are registered, or old enough to vote for the first time in the United States, and nearly half of them are Latino or Latina. So you're really seeing a lot of Latina and Latino celebrities take to the trail. You saw Jennifer Lopez come out, particularly right after those Puerto Rico comments were made in Madison Square Garden by the comedian at the event for Donald Trump, and that really caused a firestorm in the Latina and Latino community. So this Hispanic vote is really being desired by people on both sides, but definitely on the left. Kamala Harris does not want to lose this population, and she is going very heavily after the youth vote for her election campaign.
Definitely, celebrity power is reigning supreme this election, which is a really closely contested one. And to discuss the impact of the outcome of this election, we're now joined by a great panel tonight. Arnab, the global Macro Strategist-EMEA at Invesco, OP Rawat, the former Chief Election Commissioner, and KP Fabian, former ambassador. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mr. Fabian. This is an election that's too close to call, but are we expecting an election result tomorrow itself, or are there chances of a spillover given that it's such a close contest?
I think formal results will take time for various reasons. For example, in Pennsylvania, there have been heavy voting by postal ballots. So they start counting for the postal ballots for a while, then they go back to in-person voting, then they go back, so it can take a lot of time. But apart from that, apart from these procedural matters, there can be contestation, when the results are announced. So formal results will take time, but I suppose the trend will be available by sometime late tomorrow.
Okay, sometime by late tomorrow. And sir, I'll come back to you to take forward the thought of, contestation. This is something that we've seen in past contests as well. But let me come to you, Mr. Rawat. Now, as of now, Pennsylvania, a key battleground state, as Mr. Fabian was also pointing out. The latest leads actually show Harris in the lead, Nevada in Trump, Georgia, Trump. Then you have Michigan. In Michigan, Harris, of course, in the lead. In Wisconsin, again, Harris. So what happens if there is a close contest?
Actually, it appears to be a very close contest, and It will be contested, as Mr. Fabian already pointed out. And during the campaign, whatever statements have come out of both the candidates, I think they will not leave any stone unturned to influence whatever discourses are happening on the election arena. So we must wait and watch.
Right. Right, Mr. Rawat. At this point, let me come to you, Mr. Das. Thank you very much for patiently, waiting. What Mr. Fabian and, of course, Mr. Rawat are hinting towards is that there could be some sort of contestation, and that could mean more volatility in the markets. Now, analysts say that there's been a Trump trade, but help us understand the likely outcomes and their impact. Are you factoring in a Republican sweep or a split Congress? And what really would make the markets happy?
Well, thanks for having me. Look, first, I would say I think I agree with everything that's been said. I would only, on the closeness of the election and whether it's a disputed election, I would just say a couple of things. You know, there are polls that are indicating this or that candidate is ahead at this or that time. Almost all of them have been in the margin of error. So the polls are not generally a very good guide. There is one very interesting poll for the state of Iowa that just shows Harris with I think it was a 3 or 4 percentage point lead over Trump in a solidly red state. And that poll, I think, is an important outlier. It's generated a lot of discussion and a lot of soul searching throughout the U.S. because that poll correctly predicted the outcome pretty close in terms of the margin in each of the last 4 presidential elections. So you can also make the case that it won't be that close, right? And so this is another way of saying we don't really know what's going on, right? Because there's so much that's so unprecedented in this election. Joe Biden stepped down. President Trump is running for office again after leaving office the first time since Grover Cleveland, right? So a lot of stuff that's very new, very different. And I think for the markets, right, I think, there had been a bit of a Trump trade as a result of the polls swinging towards him, as a result of the election odds swinging strongly in his favor until very recently, until the closing days of the election. And in that period, the odds have really narrowed quite a bit across all the prediction market election betting sites. And the Trump trade originally, the pro-Trump trade took the form of a stronger dollar, a higher yields and a steeper yield curve on the view that policies under Trump, certainly assisted if there's a clean sweep, but even if not a clean sweep, policies would be somewhat inflationary or reflationary or stagflationary, perhaps, depending on how it was all done. And I think, the kind of narrowing of the polls, the narrowing of the betting odds have taken some of that out of the market.
Okay. Let me come to you on that point, Mr. Fabian, and let me take it from what you mentioned about the possibility of a contest, given that it's such a close contest and we are so close to the final reveal. But one cannot really help but go back to the January 6th Capitol insurrection. This time around, how serious do you think there are chances of a specter of violence really playing out, considering that in the run-up to the campaign itself, we've seen machetes being brandished and several other incidents of violence happening?
Well, that possibility is always there, but I doubt whether Trump will ask his followers or permit his followers to repeat the 6th of January. But there is another possibility, and that is if each candidate gets 269 electoral college votes, then it will be the House of Representatives who will make the final decision, and there the Republicans have a slight majority.
Okay, Mr. Fabian. Let me come to you, Mr. Das, once again. We were speaking just this morning on, past election data and how that has shown that markets have given positive returns, even though there might be a slight bit of volatility in the near term. Can you help us understand? You spoke about the impact of a Donald Trump presidency, but help us understand if there's going to be policy continuity if Kamala Harris gets voted to power, because, we were just listening to her bites and she said that she's going to be presenting a different sort of a leadership, and her leadership is going to be different from President Biden. In that scenario, what are you factoring in?
Well, look, I think, here the disposition of Congress, really matters quite a lot. And broadly speaking, what you could say is that it's a bit oversimplifying, but in broad terms, the president needs Congress on side to make anything significantly different when it comes to domestic policy. And has much more latitude in foreign policy, so national security, trade, and immigration, and other such areas. Of course, there are constraints, checks and balances everywhere you look, but that's broadly the difference. It would appear that Harris is much less likely to have a clean sweep than Trump, but even Trump isn't very likely to have a clean sweep. So the Senate seems quite likely to flip from Democratic control to Republican control. The House is probably a bit of a toss-up, but it's probably more likely to go flip towards the Democrats. Of course, if Trump wins, there's some chance that he would have a clean sweep. Now, how do you translate that into policy and into the markets? I think that although Harris is trying to both distinguish herself from Biden because it's unpopular and she has to be her own president, her own type of leader, she also stands for a good deal of continuity in many respects, right? And there was some degree of continuity between Trump and Biden as well. But I think it's fair to say, if we get President Trump, it'll be disruptive as far as the rest of the world is concerned, and maybe to some degree disruptive as far as the US is concerned, because of this point that there's much more latitude on foreign policy, and because, as we all know, President Trump, the one sort of consistent thing in his view on policy and view on the world is that he's a protectionist. And I would say, rather than an isolationist, he's a unilateralist. Harris is, I think, much more of a multilateralist, much more of a rules-based person, whereas Trump likes to, flag in the face of the rules and be disruptive. So I think, in that kind of way of looking at it, a Trump presidency would probably lead to even more of, let's say, America first markets, right? He would do things to try and boost the growth rate in the US, try and control the inflation rate in the US, and try and reshore, reindustrialize. Harris probably go in the same direction, but with much more care and much more gradually.
Right. Let me come to you in just a bit on the impact that, markets like India will have, and of course other emerging economies will have. But let me go to Mr. Rawat first. Mr. Rawat, there have been concerns that have been raised on the polling process in the United States that favors the Electoral College over the popular voting system while choosing the US president, and which is what saw Hillary Clinton and Al Gore lose in the past US election. So why is the electoral process the best one for the US? And do you think this is the best one for the US as of now? Because the United States itself, it calls itself a democracy, but many have stated that this process is antithetical to democratic principles.
I personally feel that this kind of issue should be left to the people who are sovereign in that country. And so long as they are happy with it, it's good. We can decide about our country, and we know that first past the post system for us is good.
But sir, what is your opinion on that?
I think it's okay. Whatever has been going on and delivering presidency to develop the United States of America as a very highly developed economy and without much of problems. So I think it's okay.
Sir, let me ask you a follow-up question. Let me ask you a follow-up question here with respect to this Electoral College process. Do you see it getting reversed or getting changed in times to come, given that there's been a lot of backlash on this? Like I said, many see this as some sort of an anti-democratic exercise, and this does not really completely involve the will of the people. Do you see that getting reversed in the times to come?
Maybe if US citizens feel so, but the need should be felt by them, and they are the best people to decide about it.
Okay. We'll leave it at that, sir. And let me go to Mr. Fabian. Mr. Fabian, this is, like I was earlier saying, that this is the closest election since Bush versus Gore. Also an election that seems like an inflection point for the United States in many, many ways. Economically, what's happening geopolitically, and definitely culturally. Help us understand what's at stake really for the United States and for the rest of the world. Given the kind of geopolitical developments that we are seeing, help us understand that.
Thank you. Just to say one word about that matter of Electoral College, because historically, the founding fathers put it there because they were not 100% democratically minded. They believed that the ordinary American will not be able to exercise proper judgment, and therefore there is need for a body above them. Moreover, this winner takes all business, that is certainly illogical. Now, coming to your question, if Trump is coming back, then there will be disruption. But at the same time, I want to point out that in Europe, they talk about Trump walking out of NATO. Now, this is, to my mind, a wrong conclusion, because Trump is the most enthusiastic salesperson for the military-industrial complex. Were he to walk out of NATO, then the Europeans will stop buying weapons from America. Only thing is that Trump, who insisted that they should spend at least 2% of the GDP on defense, might say that, it should be 3% or 4%. So that is one point. Second, there is something called, for want of a better expression, a deep state in the United States, consisting of, the Pentagon and the State Department, and maybe others too. Now, in his first term, Trump wanted to be as close to Putin as possible. In fact, he initially succeeded, but later the deep state stepped in and, stopped it. So Trump can disrupt, but there are limits to what he can do. And another point I want to make is that Trump has been at times unfairly criticized because he's going to North Korea, for example. Now, again, historical understanding is necessary because North Korea went nuclear because the United States refused to have a peace treaty after the ceasefire in 1953, and therefore North Korea, for its own defense reason, went it. So it was America's fault, and Trump tried to sort of talk to them and do something about it.
Okay. We'll come to some of those points, Mr. Fabian, but let me go to Mr. Das. Mr. Das, we were talking about the impact of a Trump presidency, a possible Trump presidency on the rest of the world. But let me first address the big question here on the outlook on China. So largely the United States policy has been unified, given that both sides have an anti-China stance. Trump's side, even though, is more hawkish. But will his approach, if he gets elected to power in this term, is this going to be more confrontational, more competitive, or cooperative? And basis that approach, what is the impact then you see on India and China +1?
Okay, so if I may, before I come to that, I just say a word as well on the Electoral College question. So I think it's important to recognize that the United States is not a pure democracy. It is a republic, right? And I mean, that may sound like a distinction without a difference, but I think the difference in this context is that a republic protects, or seeks to at least protect, small groups and minority groups against majorities to avoid majoritarianism. Whereas in a democracy, you really have majority rule. And that, I think, is the kind of the core function of the Electoral College, besides the the sort of elitism that Ambassador Fabian sort of referred to, which I think is also part of the logic of the Electoral College. But I think the underlying political logic is to give protection to small groups, small states, against the majoritarianism of the big states and the highly populous states. And I think that's precisely what is going on with President Trump, right? President Trump has been sort of taking a divide and conquer strategy, going for electoral college votes and sort of ignoring or even going against the majority vote. And to do that, he's been exploiting the famous polarization that is there in the country. And that is why I think it's been possible for him to win the Electoral College while losing the popular vote. And I think the strategy that he's adopted...
Mr. Das, we're completely... I'm afraid I have to interject here, but we're completely out of time. So could you please answer my question on the China factor and the China +1 push and whether that will get further momentum?
Yes, absolutely. So look, I think, both presidents will be America first oriented and sort of pushing against China. I think the difference will be that President Trump will approach it significantly, if not mainly, through tariffs, right? He calls himself tariff man all the time. Whereas with a President Harris, I think you would see more targeted tariffs as opposed to across the board tariffs. And you would see a lot of non-tariff barriers that are more targeted against national security issues. Whereas with Trump, I think it'll be much more generally economic and generally about trade, with an important military, industrial, national security emphasis there as well. I think also with President Trump, it won't be just about China. It'll be about many of the US's trading partners, especially the countries like the Eurozone and Japan, parts of the world that have large surpluses with the US. I think India is probably the large country, the large economy in the world that is the most so to speak, hedged, because there is no goods surplus that India has with the US. It has much more of a services surplus. That may be a bit of an issue, but I think it's much less of an issue than goods.
Right.
And of course, there's an increasing closeness between the US and China, between the US and India because of China, which will continue, I think.
Right, Ms. Das. Right. Thank you very much. We'll have to wrap this show here. There are many points that I want to discuss, but definitely thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening and discussing the possibility of a Trump versus a Harris victory for, of course, the global geopolitics and, of course, for trade. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, thank you very much for joining us this evening on India Tonight, but lots more coming up on the other side. And stay tuned to ET Now for a complete and comprehensive coverage starting tomorrow morning on the outcome of these US elections. Goodbye and thank you very much for staying with us.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.